Who's missing? Tony, is he coming as far as you know? Katie?
Yeah, I didn't hear that he was not. I think he even said he was.
I just
Not
sent a
sure.
text to Mina to see if he's gonna be joining, hopefully.
Frank, are you on?
Who?
Frank, I think, is leading our meeting or involved with our meeting for setup. I just had a question, but I haven't been able to get a hold of him.
Who?
Just so you know, we are live streaming already.
Could you just text Tony, please, Katie?
Yes.
Thank you. We'll wait just a minute for a couple of other people.
Mina said he'll be joining us. He's just having trouble relocating the Zoom link.
Yeah, it was a little confusing.
There he is.
Hey, Mina. You're.
Hello. Hey, Dan. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
And,
All right, I'm going to begin. Tony Buscarin's missing, but we'll start. Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Drake, Chair of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission. I call the February 16th, 2021 Special Airport Commission meeting to order. We are using the Zoom webinar for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. It's also at the top of the meeting agenda. People registering as an attendee must use their full names, otherwise they will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. Attendees will join in listening mode and they can click the raised hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hand in the order in which they were raised. If you do not have an audio capable device, you can use a call-in number. We will not be using the YouTube chat function. All questions should be directed through the chair. As a preliminary matter, permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Commission members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Arthur Gasparo.
Here.
Andrea Planzer.
Here.
Jeanette Topham. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Airport Manager Tom Rafter.
Here.
Assistant Manager Noah Carberg.
Here.
Office Manager Katie Perales.
Here.
The other anticipated speaker on the agenda is Mina Macarius of Anderson and Krieger, the airport's counsel. Are you here, Mina?
yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. This open meeting of the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth resulting from the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The governor's order, which you can find posted with agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. We do also allow public participation as outlined previously using Zoom webinar. As previously noted, for this meeting, the Nantucket Memorial Airport Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom webinar and broadcasting on the Town of Nantucket YouTube channel. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please also be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials for the meeting that have been provided to the members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I noted otherwise. Before we now turn to the agenda, permit me to cover some ground rules to provide for the effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comments, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. Thank you. The agenda for this meeting is just one item, the review of the proposed warrant article for the fiscal 2021 annual town meeting concerning rental cars. There should also be an item for public comment on the agenda, and I would add that with the consent of the commission. Everybody on board?
Yes, I agree.
Everybody's nodding their heads. Thank you. All right. As I noted before, the meeting is being both audio and video recorded. Mr. Rafter, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you. As you know, Mina has drafted various draft warrant articles and was presented to the select board last week. However, town council came up with, I think, a potential another resolution or another draft of a warrant article that included something along the lines of allowing the select board to be able to develop regulations governing the rental car operators. And I'll turn it over to Mina here in a second, but Mina has since gotten back provided his feedback to town council on that. And I don't know if he's heard anything lately, but there are 2 or 3 concerns he had there that I think what we want to try to achieve today is get the commission's approval on what the framework may be that you would like to see in that warrant article, the basics, if you will, because unless Mina has feedback that we've received and have a firm final draft, I'm not sure that that's the status we're at right now. So, Mina, have you heard anything back from town council?
I had a brief conversation with him just before this call. We were able to talk, so I can go through the issues if it makes sense now and talk about where we might be. I know Katie shared my comments on the most recent draft with the commissioners just before this meeting. So as Tom said, the select board was concerned or expressed concerns that there was insufficient time for them to figure out some of the regulatory pieces of this. The initial request in December from the commission was to simply lift the cap. There was some concern in town about just removing the cap on the number of rental cars, and instead a desire to figure out perhaps ways to deal with the problem of rental car agencies holding licenses and medallions, especially because agencies have licenses and then they have medallions per vehicle that they weren't using, and the anti-competitive effects that might have. There, you know, we expressed our concern, Tom and I, and that this would be leaving the airport and the commission with potentially, if this didn't happen at this year's town meeting, assuming it didn't happen until spring 2022, potentially another 2 summers or seasons of locked up licenses without potential for any new entrants or expansion of existing entrants who could actually use them. Town council was tasked with trying to come up with some form of solution in the interim, and what he came up with, I think, is a way for the board to do the regulation, to basically change the bylaw to authorize the select board to draft regulations that would replace the existing medallion system with an alternative system that, the biggest feature of which would be the medallions expire every year, which would get rid of a lot of the problem of holding them year to year, and have enhanced or different ways to monitor use, et cetera. What they weren't ready to do just yet is figure out a cap, for instance, on how many medallions each entity should get. They don't know how many should actually be in circulation. So that's what was drafted. I've looked at it as a concept. It certainly is better than not having any solution in the meantime. It allows more flexibility going forward to have the board do it than to have to go to town meeting to do it. The concerns we had that I've discussed with town council substantively really are 3. There's a couple more pieces in there that would only be of interest to lawyers fussing over things. But the ones that are relevant, there was a concern we had about whether it's necessary to mention online platforms and sort of non-traditional car rental arrangements. This is really in mind the Turos and other agencies like that in the world. Our view, and this is something our firm has done a lot of, is that those are already covered by your bylaw. They are commercial rental car agencies, whether they acknowledge it or not. Town council has not yet gotten feedback from his client, but he doesn't foresee a problem in removing that language. So I think we can be set on that issue. I wouldn't encourage the airport to put it. I think the town has the ability to regulate them now. The other 2 issues, which I just really look for feedback from the commission on, are, at the moment, this is a bylaw authorizing the select board, but it'll be up to them to get the regulations going. So it requires some more work, I think, from the airport working with the select board to make sure that the momentum that's built up in the last couple of weeks around this discussion continues, if you want to make sure it happens. I think there's every expectation that the whole reason they're doing this is to not wait a full year to the next town meeting, but everybody has full plates. And so obviously staying on their agenda is partly more up to you who bump into them in normal times, or at least in virtual rooms, than I would. The second thing is the way that the language is written, it doesn't necessarily raise the cap or remove the cap. It just talks about how to reallocate what you have there. And I had kind of suggested in my markup that potentially the commission would want to consider whether it wants to recommend a floor, a minimum number of medallions be available. Candidly, I am not sure what the right number would be. That is one of the issues with having unused licenses. It's possible that 700 is actually enough if they were all being used, or even a lower number, but probably not, based on what you're seeing. So that was the only other issue In both cases, there's a balance between, whether you have that discussion now or in the process of drafting regulations, what with the timing and the accurate number, both could be addressed in the regulation themselves. So that's where we are. In short, this is something that could work basically as written with a few minor tweaks that town council and I discussed this morning. I think he understands where I'm coming from. We're on the same page for most of them. And he expressed willingness and eagerness to hear your feedback if you had any on the proposal.
Thank you. Are there anything you want to add, Tom?
No, I think Mina covered it very well. The three basic items were the online platforms, the 700, whether there's a floor, and also the timing of development of the regulations, which I think is probably the most important.
All right, I'll go through the commissioners to see what comments they may have. Mr. Gasparo, why don't we start with you?
Thank you, Mina. Just for clarity, the note that you put in your most recent draft, which provided that the number is not below 700, is that necessary versus, is that if I understand, is that a result of how the initial bylaw was enacted? In other words, special legislation would be required to change that, or maybe you could expand on that.
Sure. No, I don't think you certainly don't need to go to the legislator to change that. The only thing that really you would need to go to the legislator to change would be the fee, which is capped at $100. But it's not necessary for the board's regulations. The reason I had put that in there, excuse me, is just to make it clear to folks who might be commenting to the select board. In addition to the airport, obviously this started as a concern about having enough medallions from the airport's side, and those who might care about competition among the rental car companies. What I didn't want is for this to be misperceived as an opportunity to lower or discourage rental cars even further by going to a lower number. But realistically, whether you have that in there in the bylaw as a minimum, or whether you hash that out through the regulations, I think is an open question. There's some advantage doing in the regulation. You can study the issue a little bit further and see what's actually in use, and not have town meeting be about whether 700 is the right number with perhaps not enough data. The advantage to having is just a clear message that we're not doing this to try to reduce the number. That's sort of the pro and con of it.
Thank you. That certainly helps. I wasn't quite clear that there was a distinction between the fee and the number. My sense, just for commission discussion, would be that should get hashed out at the regulation level, and that by including it, we could, just as Mina just said, it could skew that discussion, as opposed to, we also could perpetuate the same problem going forward. In other words, that you have to have a minimum number of licenses, versus if you didn't have that restriction in the bylaw, then it would leave the flexibility in the creation and the promulgation of the regulations. But that's just my first feeling on that. Thanks.
Ms. Planzer, do you have any questions or comments?
Yeah, I just have a question on the on the timing issue. As
Sorry
Tom,
about the ring.
is it the timing issue? Is that about keeping the momentum with the select board? Can you tell me?
Sure, exactly. As drafted, and I did not endeavor to change this one. I just was raising it as a question for you. Is you sometimes see in bylaws that mandate or authorize regulations, that the board shall issue regulations no later than X date or within X months. And there was one thought would be to do something like that to make sure this stays front of mind. The danger with that, of course, is since you're all airport commissioners, you see this with FAA when Congress mandates regulations or guidance right away. You get guidance that's sort of rushed at the end to hand in the paper on time as opposed to think it through. So this is really a matter of whether you want to push for town meeting to set that deadline, or if you're content with continuing to have the discussions with with the select board and the town on your own. That may be sufficient.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Topham?
I have a question. If we are doing 700 and yet some people are not using them, what is the reason for that? I don't understand it totally.
So currently there's a couple of incentives in the bylaw. I can't speak to everybody's motivation, but I can sort of read the incentives that are in the bylaw that might be creating people not using them. So the fee is limited at $100 per license and per car. And the way the bylaw is written, they don't expire and they're transferable. So just like restaurant licenses in a lot of major cities, taxi medallions has been written a lot about, and it's kind of why Uber and Lyft became a thing. The folks who have them, whether or not they put cars out for rent, have some economic incentive to hold on to the license, perhaps to sell it in a resale market or sell the right to use it in a resale market for much more than they're paying in the $100 a year to keep it, as one. And then it's also the phenomenon, if you recall, 15, 20 years ago when there'd be two Starbucks across the street from each other. If I'm holding both spots, no one else can, kind of thing. And so it's anti-competitive is one motivation. A much less cynical motivation is not knowing seasonal fluctuations year to year. One might want to own a lot of licenses so that you could quickly deploy more rental cars to Nantucket than you might otherwise be able to. That would sort of be the other, I guess, less cynical reason for it.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. First of all, in your discussions with town council and Tom, your discussions with the board, is this really our article or is it the selectmen's article that we're pushing? Or is that a distinction that doesn't need to be made? But I'll tell you why I think it does need to be made, but why don't you give me your answer first?
I'll start, and Tom, please feel free to correct or jump in. I think the perception, at least that I have heard, and again, I'm less engaged day to day in town affairs than some of you might be or Tom might be, but the perception I've heard is this was an issue that some in the town were aware of loosely, but not particularly attuned to. The airport raised it as a concern, given what you were seeing or what Tom was seeing as limitations in ability to bring in competitors, and to even put an RFP out with a guarantee that someone could get licenses if awarded an ability to operate at the airport. So I think the airport raised it. The airport sort of drove the thinking on it originally. At this point, some of the concerns have been added to, or now that others are aware of it, I think the select board is more involved in wanting to shape a solution, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So Dan, if I may, Mina's
Sure, Tom.
absolutely right. This came about, as you know, we began to develop the RFP, and it basically, the way the bylaw is written today, it would restrict us to those that can currently hold the medallion, or if they wanted to sell them, they could. But it kind of limited us on who we could select and have them still meet the proper rules and regulations to operate. So we brought this to the attention of the town, and that's when the licensing administrator, said, yeah, there have been some concerns with this. I guess the impacts just haven't been as significant to them, but she had voiced some concern with some of the other areas, and that's how this got to be expanded into some of the other sections. So.
Okay, I guess my feeling is that the the Board of Selectmen has sort of taken this over as their item to either put on the agenda or not put on the agenda, regardless of how the airport feels about it. So in a sense, I think it is their article at this point, which is relevant from my standpoint about how hard we push with some kind of time limit on this, which you raised in your note, Mina, that this was really their issue and their matter to decide when they would implement this. But from our perspective, we've got this bid process coming up. And is it unreasonable for us, even though town meeting is until June, is it unreasonable for us to say that this would, ask them to say that this would be effective next January 1st?
I don't think it's unreasonable to ask for that amount of time. It's February. Even with the 2 weeks or so of notice that they've called for in the regulations, if the draft regulations are developed this spring, they could be put out for public hearing as late as the fall if summer's not a good time. Summer might be a good time, but sometimes it's hard to do that. And then be in effect. So I don't think that's an unreasonable amount of time. I do think, the sort of strategic call that you have to decide is whether well, first, I guess that would require some consultation with the town to see if they have the time and resources to devote to doing that this spring. If they do, then I think that would help. There is some information here that's not readily available to the airport, and I'm not sure if the town has all of it either, given the history of how these medallions were used. And so that seems to be the stumbling block in doing this quickly.
Do you have a comment, Mr. Rafter?
Yes, as Mina said earlier, and what was discussed at last week's select board meeting was the town, I don't think has any incentive to move this forward in an expeditious manner, the overall warrant article. So if it were their warrant article, I believe it would be deferred again. Our concern, as Mina mentioned too, is if we don't have this through, we're going to have to put out an RFP because we've extended the existing rental car operators agreements for a term of 1 more year. So it expires at the end of this calendar year. So we're going to have to put an RFP out again. And we're in a kind of a catch-22 because if the current bylaw is still in effect when we put that out, it's going to limit or have some restrictions on who we're able to select as an operator. Should we elect to select a entry? I wanted to make it clear, and I made this clear at the select board meeting, there's apparently some confusion that there's a thought out there that we're looking to try to bring in a 4th operator, and that is not the case. We just want to be able to have an open playing field, that's all.
All right, well, I'm going to suggest before we finish up today that part of our motion of approval be a request to the board that the article be made effective as of January 1, 2022. We can discuss that further and ultimately vote on it, but that's going to be the proposal that I'm going to make.
Dan, could I ask a quick question just to clarify? So the article will take effect as soon as approved by the AG after town meeting. But I think just to be clear, what you're asking for is that the regulations issued under the article that the select board issued take effect.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. My second question, though, is a logistical question. The draft of the article requires them to provide the license plates, basically the registration number of every vehicle that they want covered by a medallion. Am I correct in that?
That is actually in the current bylaw already. I'm looking at the words registration number
Yeah,
show
but that's,
up.
but they're not getting new medallions now, right? They're just holding over them.
They're
So there's
holding them
no,
over, right?
no.
Right.
So my question is it feasible for a rental car company, because I don't really know how they operate, to have this list available by January 1st for the following season? Have you had any discussion about that?
I certainly haven't discussed it with rental car companies, but I do know this was raised as a concern generally with how to regulate these. If you have, beach stickers or parking permits in most cities and towns, it's very easy to do this. It's the individual, they know what car they'll have and what license plate will be on it, generally speaking. But you're right, with rental car companies, the cars sort of end up sometimes in different places than where they started. You rent it at Logan, it might end up in Nantucket, a different one might end up somewhere else, et cetera. So that is an issue. I guess one of the questions for the town that I don't know that we've gotten, that we've really had a full discussion with the town is, do they actually know today all of those license plates, or do they get incomplete compliance with the request now? To your point, Dan, I wouldn't be surprised if they do get incomplete compliance because folks don't know which cars they'll have here.
Mhm. Okay. I think that's all I have. Anybody else want to respond to anything that I said, or? No? Okay. We do have one attendee in the meeting. I would ask that person if she wants to make any comment, to raise her hand now. Seeing none. Yes, Mr. Gasparo.
So I guess the question would be back to, whatever action we're going to take. It sounds like overall we had 2 comments, one from me with respect to the 700 number and one from you with respect to the timing. If we are going to discuss modifications to if our action is going to be to support the draft article put forth by council, then those 2 items probably would need to be discussed. If I
agree 100%.
And I would just, since I'm talking, just say I'm fine.
Could I interrupt you for a moment, please, Mr. Gasparo? The member of the public has her hand up. So I will call on her. If you could unmute her, please.
Hello, can
Would
you hear
identify
me?
yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. My name's Judith Wagner. I live in Quidnet. I'm chair of the planning board. I just want you to know that what happens in terms of traffic and congestion is a real factor that the planning board has to deal with all the time, as does the Nantucket Planning and Economic Development Commission. So I spoke with concerns at the select board meeting, and I am going to be attending any meeting you discuss this matter at. I appreciate the chance to do that. And for your legal colleague there, for what it's worth, my background is I'm a retired law professor who taught at University of North Carolina for 35 years in the field of state and local government law. So I've been following related issues for quite some time. Thank you for having distributed this information and for holding this public meeting.
Ms. Wagner, the only comment I would make in response to that is that by this article, the airport is not advocating an increase in the number of uh, medallions. That's up to the Board of Selectmen to decide. So I think the appropriate interplay will be in the future when they come up with the regulations.
May I respond?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I understand that and I will going forward. It just would have to say it was disappointing to have this come up with, no, I try very hard from the planning board side to be aware of what other commissions and boards are doing and try to be available and aware of what goes on. I understand that this version seems to me to be much better than the one that was originally proposed. And I fully intend to and understood from the select board at their prior meeting that they would intend to have invite further advice from NPDC as well. So again, I thank you. I continue to try to understand the rationales behind this because during the select board meeting, there were explanations of what was not the point and what was not the problem. But I think everyone needs to be aware that we live on an island with considerable pressures that go with the visitors we have and so forth. So I, again, would simply say thank you for the opportunity to be at this meeting.
Thank you. All right. For discussion purposes, I will entertain a motion to recommend the article as drafted to the Board of Selectmen with two specific points called out in our recommendation, one being the timing, where I would include in the motion a recommendation that the regulations be effective January 1st, 2022. And include in the recommendation also that the floor of 700 remain in the article as presented to town meeting. And if there's is there such a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Buscarin. Is there a second?
Second,
Thank you. I didn't mention it, Mr. Gasparo, but when I spoke, I just, the 700 is sort of a magic number, I think, from some members of the voting community. And since that's the number that's out there, and if this article weren't coming up, it wouldn't be changed anyway. So I'm sort of inclined not to change it at this point, not recommend it be changed. But left where it is and leave it up to the selectmen if they want to increase the number. Having said that, I'll open it up for discussion.
I don't want to go around and around on it. I think that there shouldn't be a number that establishes the minimum, just personally. I think that should be left so that it's not fixed in a bylaw and is able to be adjusted, much like the limit, but that's fine.
Anything else, Ms. Planzer?
No.
Ms. Topham? Mr. Buscarin?
I have no comment. I agree with Arthur.
Do you want to take a vote on whether we leave the minimum in there or not?
Well, I think we have a motion on the floor, so we could either.
Well, I mean, if you want to make a motion to amend it, you could do that.
Sure. I mean, I would be happy to support the timing issue and take the issue of the I guess the floor number of 700 separately, or maybe we should take that first.
Let's take that first. Is there a motion to amend the motion that was made
I think the motion.
to eliminate the floor of 700?
Sure, that would be my motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion?
I hate to see that we're going, the possibility of increasing, because we always, as you understand, in the summer, we have so much problems with cars and traffic.
Well, the only response I would make to that is actually, as we all know, the traffic at the airport is down considerably from what it was in years past. And not just the pandemic, but the trend has been down. It's less than a third of what it was, if I'm correct, Mr. Rafter. So I don't believe, personally, I don't believe that the airport has contributed to the substantial increase in traffic on Old South Road, and that, given that statistic.
On that, it's all work trucks.
So is there anything else on the amendment to eliminate the minimum?
My only comment would be just that if there's sort of to what Mina was describing earlier, that, you know, it needs more study to really figure that out. And so hopefully we wouldn't overly tie the hands of the select board when there's an actual study being done. Maybe it's determined when there is some kind of a work group or however they come up with these regulations that in fact that number 500 works better for the overall system or whatnot. I just think that should come out of a more in-depth process than just holding a number that's been the same since 84 or whatever that was put forth.
Mr. Rafter?
Yeah, I just have a concern with that logic, because when you talk about doing an analysis and a study, I always go with the mantra that, you know, you can't manage it if you don't measure it. We're not charged with measuring these, and we don't have the data and the information that everybody would like to see in order to make a very well-informed decision as to what the number is. However, if we don't put a floor, if for whatever reason the floor becomes 200, it could almost eliminate the entire rental car business and reduce the level of service at the airport that we're able to provide to our customers. And that's just my concern of that. I think 700's been 700 for years. It's worked. If they came back and said 200 tomorrow, I don't know that we'd have any rental car service here at the airport. But we certainly have a much pared down offering, and that's going to, if you will, force folks to seek other alternatives that are not currently regulated through our capabilities.
Anything else? All right, we're going to take a vote on the amendment to eliminate the floor from the proposed recommendation to the Board of Selectmen. How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
No.
Ms. Planzer?
No.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
The chair votes no. The motion to I'm sorry, the motion to amend the original motion by eliminating the floor fails. So we have a motion now which recommends adoption of the I'm sorry. We have a motion that recommends to the Board of Selectmen the adoption of the proposed warrant article with a recommendation for an effective date of January 1, 2022, and the floor of 700 on the number of medallions. Is there further comment or discussion? Mr. Gasparo?
Now, how does this work with respect to the ongoing discussions that our council and town council are still having? Does there need to be some additional language, or is there a way, I guess, maybe through you, Mr. Chair, to council, like, does there need to be a little bit of flexibility somehow in there, or is this it?
Mr. Macarius?
So, Mr. Chair, you can, I just want to make sure that the commission agrees with this approach as you vote. My expectation was that this would be feedback that I would convey to town council he's already seen the draft that you saw. So based on your last vote, I would say the commission is asking to keep the language that I added. The floor won't go below the 700, which is what I understood. The second piece, assuming if you voted yes on this next piece, I would say that the commission's request is that there be language in here to require the regulation to be issued so that it's effective on or before January 1st, 2022. And then he would decide with the select board whether that's something they support or not. They could say, sorry, we don't agree with that. We're going to push this forward. It's ultimately their warrant and their warrant article for town meeting to put in. They could decide to go forward without it. And then as town meeting rolls around in June, between now and then, certainly could keep working on the regulation, and you could revisit your support or lack of support if you decide for the article as amended.
Does that answer your
That's
question,
sort of more
Mr.?
feedback than anything else. So.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Gasparo?
Does, thank you.
There are any other questions or comments? So essentially what we have here is a motion to recommend to the board the approval of the language of the amended bylaw, including regulations to be effective on or before January 1, 2022, and including a floor of 700 medallions in the bylaw. Is that everybody's understanding? Any further comments? How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
No.
And the chair votes aye. So I think you have the motion passes. You have your instructions and message to be delivered to town council, and also by you, Mr. Rafter, I guess tonight at the Board of Selectmen meeting.
Tomorrow night, I believe.
I'm sorry, tomorrow night.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. There being no further business before the commission, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll
So
make
moved.
that motion.
Second.
Thank you. How do you vote, Mr. Buscarin?
Aye.
Ms. Topham?
Aye.
Ms. Planzer?
Aye.
Mr. Gasparo?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mina.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Take care.